Welcome on board. All right, before we get into the main aspect of the course, let's quickly look at a CSS naming convention that is called BEM. BEM stands for Block Element Modifier. And if you've been in the business for a while, you may have heard about this CSS naming approach. So with BEM, we're able to name our classes or IDs in a descriptive manner. And apart from that, it equally helps us to be able to nest selector, as you will see in a subsequent lesson. So in this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to this convention. All right, so let's see these designs. Here is a tab containing 3 buttons. All right, now this is currently the active tab, Get Started. If I click on courses, it should take on the appearance of Get Started, while Get Started will be like this other two. And the same thing will happen when I click on enrollment. Right now, this is not responsive. Okay, now so if we want to create this tab following the BEM convention, how do we do that? Now let's get to work. So here in index.html, within the body, I'm going to have a div container, and it should have 3 buttons. And the first one is Get Started, and I'm going to copy it, change this to courses as we saw in that design, and this to enrollment. Okay, now what we have here is a block of HTML element that we can reuse elsewhere, because this is a tab. It's possible that within that project I'm working on, I could have a couple of places where I need to use a tab. So this is a typical reusable piece, isn't it? Now, so following the BEM convention, how can I name this block? Right? So I can say tabs. Now, the pluralization there is not part of the convention, but of course it will make sense. Because one of the things I said about the Block Element Modifier convention is that we're able to give meaningful names. So if I call these tabs, it is descriptive. It makes sense because it contains 3 tabs, as you can see. Now, the individual tab, I can then call them tabs, that is the block name, underscore, underscore, whatever I want to call the element. And in this case, I should call it button. All right? So I could copy this same class again and replicate it for the other ones, like so. Right. So what you see here, it's a typical example of element nested in a block, where these tabs represent the block, and each of these 3 represent the element. Each of them is an element in the context of the BEM notation. All right. So this is an example, right? So if you look at the way it is named, you see that it takes the block name, in this case tabs, 2 underscore followed by whatever I want to call the element. And it makes sense in this case to call it button. And this is a typical example of nested elements in a block. But believe me, things are not always going to be this simple or easy. You're going to have examples or cases where you have elements that also contain nested elements. So let's see an example of that. So I will come under, and I have a block copied to the clipboard. To save time, I will paste it. Now let's go through this. Now, if you look at this is nav menu. Again, this is the block. But again, note, I call it nav menu. The dash between the nav and menu is not part of the convention. All right? That's just my making. I could have just said nav menu like this. Okay. But it makes sense for it to be hyphenated here, since I'm dealing with 2 words, nav and menu. And so that represents the block. And within the block, I have a UL that has a class of nav menu list. Again, you see the notation, the block name, followed by the element name. In this case, list. But look at it, unlike the previous example, within the list now, I have a couple of nested elements, starting with menu item, all right, which represent the li there. And within the menu item, I have menu link, that is nav menu link. Okay. Now, so what you see here is an example of nested elements within element. Now, what are the nested elements here? Nav menu link is nested inside nav menu item. Okay. And it repeats for the other LIs. Okay. So again, this nav is a reusable piece because I can reuse it elsewhere in my project or even in another project without having to recreate it. So this is one of the beauties of the block element modifier approach of naming selectors. Now, so far, we have looked at two of the three words that make up BEM. That is block and element. We haven't said anything about modifier. Now, look at this design that we looked at previously. In this design, you see that of these three buttons, this one has a background color of white and a text color of black, because this is the active tab at this moment, is the active button. Now, if I click on this or this, it should turn to this. That is, it should have a background color of white like we have it now. Of course, though this is just an image, it can't respond for us to see what I'm talking about, but I believe you understand what I'm talking about. So right now, this is the active tab. What is a modifier? A modifier is a version of an element or a block. This is an element, and from the design I just showed you, it is the one that is currently active. So how can I modify this element to show that it is the one that is currently active? Because if you look at the fact that these three buttons have the same selectors names, tabs button, so it means that they will all have the same styles applied to them. But how can I then make one of them stand out when it is clicked on? That is, when it is active. And how to do that is to add a modifier. And to add a modifier is also simple. All I need to do is to say tabs, which is the block name, underscore, underscore, the item name, which is in this case button, and this time around, 2 dashes, dash, dash, then the modifier name. So what do I want to call this modifier? I want to call it active to show that that is the currently active tab. So by doing this, I now have a modifier to this element, meaning that when the page loads, this is the currently active tab. And of course, when the user clicks on any of these other two, then the active tabs will move. Okay. And say, for example, if he clicks on this, it becomes this. This becomes the active tab. And if it is the third one it clicks on, then the third one becomes the active tab, like so. So this is modifier. And when we have something like this, we have the complete acronym block, element, and modifier. So I can say this one now with modifier. So this is how modifier is applied in the context of the block element modifier. So in this case now, all I need to do is this particular modifier, I will just have to add the CSS properties and value that is unique to it. In the case of the example we saw, it will mean that the background color of this button would then be white in that case, and the text color will be black. And that make it a different version of the button. And that's exactly what modifier does. The same way modifier can be applied to an element within the context of BEM, it can also be applied to a block. So for example, maybe in this case now, I want a nav that has a box shadow. So if we need a box shadow, do I have to create a different nav block altogether? Of course, probably if you're a beginner, you may want to attempt that, but as a senior developer, you just need to apply a modifier to this nav block. And voila, you have another block or a different version of the block. So what do I need to do in this case? For example, I may have a modifier that is nav menu dash dash shadow. So that means that this CSS, when applied to the nav container, will give that nav container that I applied to a box shadow. And I hope you understand that. And of course, you'll see that in the course project later on. As you grow to become a CSS senior developer, you're most likely going to be using this approach. And most of the code bases you will see written in 2024 and beyond, you're going to see the selectors written in this way. So this is a convention you may want to, try as much as possible to get a hang on. Okay, so that's a case of nested element. Now let's look at another case. This time around, let's look at a case of nested block. That is a block nested in another block. Again, I have another snippet copied to clipboard. So let me place. Now here is another example. This case, we have a block called card. And this card has about 3 distinct parts: the header, the body, and the footer. Good. Now the header, the body, and footer are all elements, as you of course may already know by now. Good. But within this card, I have another block, which is called buttons. Now, why is it another block? It's another block because it is not named with any underscore or dash, dash, dash. So this is a button. And within this button, I have two buttons in it. Now, so why would we want to do something like this in a design? Well, we want to do something like this because typically in a website, you could have multiple buttons or places where you use buttons. And you may also have different designs of the button. You may have some that has a background color. You may have some that have just border without background color and a different text color compared to the one that has background color. Now, because this is a button that can be reused in multiple places in your design, if I'm going to use it in a container that is called card, it won't make sense for me to tie it to that container, all right? Therefore, when I'm crafting my HTML or when I'm marking up my content, it is important that I know that I should create that button as a block that is not tied to the card. And again, you're going to see an example of this in the course project later on. Now, so this button now becomes a reusable piece. If we were doing a React or Next.js project, these buttons will be in its own class. That is, I could save it in button.js. All right. So it is important you understand what is a block when you are marking up your content. And what is a block? A block is something that can be reused, that can stand alone. But look at it. Though we say it's something that can be reused, that can stand alone, a block doesn't have to be reusable before it can stand alone. I think it's important you understand that. If something can stand on its own, then it qualifies to be a block. Now, all of this sound like theory now, and of course it is, but you're going to see them in the actual course project later on. So if I wasn't using a block for this button, how else could I have created it? So I will Ctrl V to paste. Now, if I wasn't interested in making this button to stand alone, what I would have done is tie it to this card. And in that case, I will take off the block and have something like this. Okay, so now this time around, I can then name this one card dash dash underscore underscore button. And same thing, card underscore underscore button. This way now, these card buttons are tied to this card and can only be used in this card. That's important. And why would I do something like this in a typical project? I will do it if I know that this is the only place that I'm going to use these buttons. If you do this, then it means you've made up your mind at the time of designing or marking up your content that this button will only be used in this place and this place alone, such that when you're writing your CSS, they can be nested within this card. So in this case now, you see that these buttons are tied to this card footer, whereas in this place, they stand on their own. And when you look at the way they are named in this place, it has nothing to do with this card. There's nothing like card in their name. This is buttons and this is button button. Whereas in this case, this is card button, meaning that this particular button here is tied to this card. So that's an example. So here now you see an example of a block nested in a block. Let me give that here and say block with nested block. Okay, so this is basically about what the BEM notation it's about. It's about naming CSS classes in such a way that you could have certain content to be a block which can stand on their own and also capable of being reused elsewhere in your project, and also the ability to be able to give descriptive names to your selectors. Okay, with this now, you have a background knowledge what the BEM notation it's about, and that's what we're going to be using in subsequent sections of this course.